There is a particular kind of silence that only happens in a garage at 2 in the morning, when a man my age is the only one awake on his whole street. It is not the silence of an empty house. It is the silence of a place that has been listening to you for 40 years and has started to know you better than you know yourself. That night, I stood under the single yellow bulb that hangs over my workbench, and I looked at the steel cabinet in the back corner, army green, dented on the left side from when I dropped it off the back of a truck in 1978. A padlock on the front that has been closed for 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days. I know the count because I am the kind of man who keeps a count. I did not open it. I never open it. I just walked over, put 2 fingers on the cold metal of the lock, and stood there long enough for the heater in the corner to click off and on again. Then I turned around, picked up the coffee cup I had been carrying, and went back to the house. That is how a lot of my nights go now. My name is Robert Hollis, though almost no one calls me Robert anymore. To the fellas at the diner, I am Rob. To my granddaughter, when she was learning to talk, I was Ba. To my wife, Helen, for 41 years, I was just you, as in, you forgot to put the milk away again. Or, you sure you don't want to sit down a minute? There is no name in the world I miss the sound of more than that one. I am 68 years old. I live in Bakersfield, California, in a ranch house Helen and I bought in 1979, back when the down payment took everything we had, and a little more we did not have. The house is small, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, a kitchen with linoleum that started yellow and is now somewhere between coffee and rust. The lawn out front is not what it used to be. I cut it when I remember, which is not as often as I should. The garage, though, the garage is something else. It is a detached 2-car garage, set back about 30 feet from the house, with a side door that has the same brass knob I installed in 1983. Inside, every inch of wall has been put to work, pegboards full of wrenches, sorted by size and then by use, a rolling tool chest taller than my granddaughter, a drill press I rebuilt twice, a welding station with the curtain still hanging where Helen used to draw it shut when she came out to bring me a sandwich. The concrete floor has a stain near the bench in the shape of, I always thought, the state of Louisiana. Helen said it looked like a dog. We never settled it. People walk into that garage and they see clutter. I walk into that garage and I see 34 years of working in oil refineries and petrochemical plants. I see 14-hour shifts in the 80s and 90s, when the country still made things and a man could feed 2 kids on what his hands could do. I see the smell of solvent that I cannot get out of certain jackets no matter how many times Helen washed them. I see the partial deafness in my left ear from standing too close to a turbine in 1988, the same year my son was born. I see the 2 missing fingertips on my right hand, from a press that bit me in '86. People look at my hands and they wince. I look at them and I see a resume. That morning, after I came back in from the garage, I put the coffee cup in the sink and stood by the window over the counter. Bakersfield was still dark. The neighbor's porch light across the street made a small yellow square on the asphalt. I could hear the freight train, the one that comes through every night around 2:30, somewhere off to the south. I have heard that train every night I have lived in this house. It is one of those sounds that, when it stops, you finally notice it. The refrigerator door has a recipe card on it. It is stuck under a magnet shaped like a slice of watermelon. The card is for Helen's pot roast, the one with the onion soup mix and the carrots she always cut too big. Her handwriting is on the card, round, careful, with little loops on the lowercase L's. I have read that card maybe 1,000 times since she died. I do not need the recipe. I know the recipe. I read the card because reading the card is the closest I get to hearing her say the words. I stood there a long time. Then I made fresh coffee. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, the one Helen and I bought at a yard sale in '81. And I waited for the sun to come up over the back fence. That was my morning. That has been a lot of my mornings for 4 years. I did not know yet that in 3 days, the phone would ring and my son's voice would change everything. I just knew the coffee was bitter and the house was quiet and the cabinet in the garage was still locked, the way it had been since the morning Helen did not wake up. Tuesday mornings, I eat breakfast at a diner called Lucy's, off Highway 99, about 4 miles from my house. I have done this for 19 years. I started doing it because Helen wanted me out of the kitchen one morning a week, so she could read her library books without me asking what she wanted for lunch. I kept doing it after she was gone because I could not figure out how to stop. Lucy's is the kind of place that has not changed since the first Bush administration. Vinyl booths the color of an old cherry pie. Counter with chrome trim that has gone dull in the spots where men like me have leaned their elbows. Coffee that is too strong, on purpose. A jukebox in the corner that nobody puts money in anymore but which still glows pink and blue at night. Donna has been waiting on me at Lucy's since 2007. She is somewhere north of 50, with a gray streak in her hair she keeps because, she told me once, her granddaughter likes it. She does not ask me what I want to order. She brings me coffee, 2 eggs over medium, hash browns extra crispy, 2 strips of bacon, and dry wheat toast, and she sets it down in front of me and says, "Morning, sugar." And then she goes to the next booth. That Tuesday, 3 days before my son's car would pull into my driveway, I sat at my regular spot at the counter and watched a young man at the booth nearest the door try to order something Lucy's did not have. It was a thing with avocado in it. He was wearing the kind of sunglasses you push up on top of your head even when you are inside. Donna was patient with him. She is patient with everyone. But I saw her glance at me, just for a second. The way 2 people glance at each other when they have been on the same side of a wall for 19 years. I ate my eggs. I read the local paper, the parts of it that were left. I watched the rain start, then stop, then start again on the window. October in Bakersfield is a strange month. The heat finally gives up, but it does not give up cleanly. It pretends it is still summer. Then it pretends it is already winter, and you have to keep 2 jackets in the truck just in case. After breakfast, I sat in the parking lot for a while before I started the engine. My pickup is a 1994 Ford F-150, white, with a dent in the tailgate from when Daniel learned to ride a bike into it. I have replaced the engine once, the transmission twice. The radio still has a cassette deck. There is a cassette in it right now, a tape Helen made me in 1986 with Merle Haggard on one side and Patsy Cline on the other. I do not play it often. Some things you save for the days that need them. When I got home, I went straight to the garage. I do not know why. I had nothing planned. There was no project on the bench. But that is the thing about a garage that has been yours for 40 years. It does not need a reason. It calls you in the way a dog does when it hears your boots on the porch. I turned on the yellow bulb. I sat down on the rolling stool. I looked around. On the wall above the bench, in a row, are the blueprints I drew in the 90s for the seal assemblies at the Kern River plant. They are pinned up with thumbtacks that have rusted in place. Next to them is a photograph of me and Frank Delgado, taken in 1989, both of us in hard hats, both of us grinning like we had just gotten away with something. Frank is on my left. He always stood on my left because he knew about my hearing. Frank has been dead since 1990. I will get to that. To my right, against the back wall, is the Army Green Cabinet. I have already told you about it. I will not look at it now. To my left, leaning against the wall, is the only thing in this garage that nobody but me has ever touched. It is a long shape under a canvas drop cloth, about 4 feet high and 6 feet long, with the canvas tied down at the base with twine. I have not lifted that cloth in 3 years. I do not need to. I know what is under it. I just have not been ready. I sat on the stool a long time that Tuesday. I drank the last of the coffee from a thermos I had brought out from the kitchen. I thought about Helen, the way she used to come out around 4 in the afternoon with the radio on her hip, and she would prop herself on the doorway and say, "How's it coming?" "Engineer." I never had a good answer. Engineering is mostly waiting for something to be wrong so you can be right about it. The phone in my pocket buzzed. It was a text from my son, Daniel. The text said, "Hey, Dad, we're going to drive down Sunday. Bringing Caleb, Megan too." Okay. I read it 3 times. I did not answer right away. It had been 6 weeks since Daniel had come to see me. It had been 4 months since Caleb had been in this house. My grandson is 4 years old. At that age, 4 months is a long enough piece of a life that a child can forget the shape of a man's face. I typed back, "Sure, glad to have you." Then I sat in the garage for another 45 minutes, looking at nothing in particular, and trying to figure out why my hands were a little colder than usual. I want to tell you about Helen before I tell you about the Sunday. Helen Margaret Hollis, born March 4th, 1953, in Tulare County, California. Died June 19th, 2020, at 5:52 in the morning, at our kitchen table, with a cup of tea in front of her and a book open to a page she had marked with one of those little tabs that come on a sticky strip. The book was a paperback mystery by a woman whose name I cannot remember now, which bothers me, because I should remember it. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in February of that year. By May we knew. By June it was done. 4 months. People say cancer is a long fight. For us it was not. It was a freight train. We did not get to argue with it. We did not get to bargain. We just got out of the way and watched it go through our living room. The morning she died, she had woken up before me. That was unusual by then. She had not had the strength for a long time. But she had gotten herself out to the kitchen, made the tea, sat down, opened her book. When I came out in my robe and saw her there, I thought, for 1 second, that she was getting better. That was the cruelest second of my life. Because in the next second, I saw the way her head was resting against her hand, and I knew. I do not talk about that morning often. I am not going to talk about it more here. I just want you to know it happened. And I want you to know I was the one who found her. And I want you to know that when the paramedics came, I asked them to please not move the book. After the funeral, after the casseroles stopped coming, after Daniel went back to San Jose and I started learning how to live by myself for the first time since I was 23 years old, I walked out to the garage one night and I locked the cabinet. The army green one. I put a padlock on it that I had bought that afternoon at the hardware store on Brundage Lane. I did not open the cabinet first. I did not look inside. I just snapped the lock shut. I will tell you what is in that cabinet. I will. But not yet. There is a right time for that, and this is not it. Daniel was born in 1988. He came out red and angry and skinny. And the first time the nurse handed him to me, I held him like he was a piece of equipment I had not been trained to operate. Helen laughed at me from the hospital bed. She said, "Robert, he's a baby, not a transmission." I said, "I know that, Helen, but the transmission I would know what to do with." He was a good boy, quiet, like me, smart in a way I was not. He would take things apart, but unlike me, he would write down what he saw before he put them back together. I used to find his notebooks under the couch, full of little drawings of clocks and toasters, and once, when he was 9, the carburetor off my old Chevy. He labeled everything. He always wanted to know the right word for the thing. I told Helen one night, when Daniel was about 11, "That boy is going to be smarter than me by the time he's 15, Helen said. "Robert, he's already smarter than you. You're just the last to know." She was right. By the time he was in high school, he was bringing home math I could not follow. By the time he was in college at Cal Poly, he was studying computer engineering and talking about things I could only halfway picture. By the time he was 26, he had a job at a company in San Jose and was making more money in a year than I had ever made in 3. By the time he was 30, he had started his own company. By the time he was 36, the year I am telling you about, that company had grown into something that, on paper, was worth more than every house on my street put together. I was proud of him. I am proud of him. I want you to hear that clearly before I tell you the rest of this story, because there is going to be a part where I sound like a man who is bitter. And I do not want you to think for a second that I was ever anything but proud of my son. But there is a thing that happens between a father and a son when the son outgrows the father's world. It is not anyone's fault. The world keeps shifting under your feet, and the son learns to ride the new shape of it, and the father stays where he learned to stand. And one day, the son visits home and he looks around at the house he grew up in, and you can see in his eyes that he is editing it. He is seeing where the new countertops would go. He is hearing the silence and thinking it is sad instead of peaceful. He is looking at his father's garage and thinking, with love. Mind you, with love. But thinking all the same, this is too much. This needs to be cleared out. This is no way for a man to live. I had felt that look from Daniel for about 2 years. I had not put words to it. A father does not put words to a thing like that if he can help it. But then he married Megan. Megan is not a bad woman. I want to say that first. I have heard too many men my age talk about their daughters-in-law like they are something to be survived. And I do not want to be one of those men. Megan loves my son. She is a good mother to Caleb. She works hard, she is smart, and she is organized. And she is the kind of person who knows where every receipt for the last 7 years is filed. But Megan and I see the world from two different sides of a window. And when she looks at me, she sees an old man with a cluttered garage and a wife who has been gone 4 years and a refrigerator that still has his dead wife's recipe card on it. She sees, I think, a problem to be managed. She would not say that. She would not even think it in those words. But it is in the way she walks through my house when she comes to visit. She trails her fingers along the back of the couch like she is checking for dust. She opens the refrigerator and rearranges the condiments without realizing she is doing it. She looks at the recipe card on the fridge, and her mouth makes a small shape that is not quite a frown. And then she moves on. The first time she came to our house, back when she was Daniel's girlfriend, Helen was still alive. Helen was the one who could handle people like Megan. Helen could pour a cup of coffee and ask one question, and have a woman like that telling her the whole story of her life by the time the second cup was poured. Helen had a gift that I do not have. After Helen died, I lost the translator between my world and the world of women like Megan, and we have been speaking past each other ever since. I do not blame her. She came up in a different time. She grew up in a clean house in a quiet suburb of Sacramento, with parents who both worked in offices and who threw things out the moment they stopped being useful. Her version of love is order. Her version of caring for someone is solving them. Mine is not. Mine is sitting with a person in their silence and not trying to fix it. So when Daniel told me, 2.5 years ago, that he was going to marry her, I shook his hand and I said, "Congratulations, son." And I meant it, and I have meant it every day since. But I also knew, in the part of me that has watched enough machinery to understand stress points, that there were going to be some Sundays in our future that were not going to go easy. The Sunday they were coming was 3 days off. I spent the rest of that Tuesday cleaning up the garage. Not because Megan was coming, because Caleb was coming. And Caleb at 4 years old is the kind of boy who reaches for everything. And I did not want anything sharp where his little hands could find it. I rolled up the extension cords. I swept the floor. I wiped down the bench. I put the welding curtain back where Helen used to draw it shut, even though I had not welded anything in a year. I stacked the loose lumber against the side wall in a tidier pile. I lined up my tool chests so the drawers all closed flush. I did not touch the cabinet. I did not touch the shape under the canvas drop cloth. I worked until the sun went down. Then I stood in the doorway of the garage and looked back at what I had done. It was, by any honest accounting, still a workshop, still full, still mine. But it was as ready as I knew how to make it. I locked up. I walked back to the house. I made myself a grilled cheese sandwich on the stove, the way Helen had taught me, with the heat low and the butter going almost to brown, but not quite. I ate at the kitchen table. I looked at the empty chair across from me. I always look at it. I do not know if that is healthy. I know it is what I do. After dinner, I sat in the recliner in the living room, and I called Daniel. He did not pick up. That was not unusual. He works late. I left a short message. I said, "Son, it's your dad. Looking forward to Sunday. Tell Caleb his grandpa is making the pot roast. Tell Megan she doesn't have to bring anything. Drive safe." I hung up. Then I sat in the recliner with the television off, and I listened to the freight train come through, a little earlier than usual that night. I thought about the way Daniel had sounded the last time we had talked on the phone, about a month before. He had sounded tired. He had sounded like a man with a hand on his neck. He had told me the company was growing fast, that there were some technical challenges he could not get into, and that he had not been sleeping. I had asked him if he was eating. He had laughed in a way that was not a laugh. I had not thought much of it then. Sons get busy. Companies have problems. That is the nature of work. But sitting there in the recliner that Tuesday night, with the freight train going past and the house dark around me, I had the strangest feeling. It was not worry, exactly. It was not fear. It was the feeling I used to get on the job sometimes, in the last hour before a shutdown, when all the gauges read normal, but the building itself was telling me something the gauges could not. A machine knows when something is coming. A man who has spent his life listening to machines, after a while, knows too. I went to bed at 10. I did not sleep well. I dreamed about Frank Delgado, which I had not done in a long time. In the dream, he was standing on my left side, the way he always did, and he was holding a rolled-up blueprint, and he was trying to tell me something I could not hear over the noise of the plant. I woke up at 4 in the morning. I lay there in the dark for a while. Then I got up, put on my robe, and walked out to the garage in my slippers, the dew cold on my ankles. I turned on the yellow bulb. I stood in the doorway. I looked at the army green cabinet in the back corner. For the first time in 4 years, I thought about opening it. I did not, but I thought about it. And that was the beginning. Sunday came in, the way Sundays always come in Bakersfield in late October. The sky started out the color of a dish rag, then it cleared by 10. Then the wind picked up out of the northwest, and the dust came off the fields and got into the screen door, no matter how tight you closed it. I had been up since 5. I had already put the pot roast in the slow cooker by 7, and by 9 I had vacuumed the living room twice, because the first time I had missed under the coffee table and Helen would have noticed. Helen has been gone 4 years. I still do things the way she would have noticed. Daniel had texted me at 8:45 to say they had left San Jose. That meant, with a stop for Caleb, they would be in my driveway by 2. 5 hours of road. I knew the route. I had driven it more times than I could count when Daniel was at Cal Poly. Hauling boxes and a futon, and once an entire dorm refrigerator that did not fit in the back of the F-150 without us strapping the tailgate down with a bungee cord. Helen had ridden along on that one. She had spent the whole way reading a paperback and telling me to slow down at every overpass. I went out to the garage at 10. I do not know why. I had cleaned it 3 days running. There was nothing left to clean. But I went out anyway, and I stood there in the doorway, and I tried to see it the way Megan would see it when she arrived. I tried to be honest with myself. Honestly, it was full. There was no other word for it. The pegboards above the bench held more wrenches than any one man could use in a lifetime. And I will admit that some of them were duplicates from the days when Frank and I had both worked the same plant and bought the same tools. The drill press took up more floor than a drill press needs to. The rolling chests were lined up like soldiers. 4 of them, each one heavier than the last. The shelves along the back wall held boxes of fittings and gaskets and bearings that I had pulled out of decommissioned equipment over the years. The kind of parts you cannot buy anymore because the men who made them have all retired or died. To me, that was inventory. To Megan, That was clutter. I knew, standing there, which side of that argument I was going to lose. You cannot win an argument with a person who does not speak the same language as the thing you are defending. I went back into the house. I checked the pot roast. I set the table for 4. I put out the good plates, the ones with the small blue flowers around the rim, the ones Helen had bought one piece at a time at the grocery store with little stickers we used to peel off the back. I put out cloth napkins. I put out the salt and pepper shakers shaped like chickens that Caleb liked. I poured water into the glasses and put a slice of lemon in each one, because Helen always said it made the table look like somebody had thought about it. Then I sat in the recliner and I waited. The clock on the mantel was the one Helen's mother had given us as a wedding present in '79. It ticks loud enough to keep a man company. I let it. At 1:57, I heard a car door in the driveway. I want to tell you the truth about that moment, because if I do not tell you the truth about that moment, the rest of this story will not weigh what it is supposed to weigh. The truth is this: when I heard that car door, my heart did something it had not done in 4 months. It lifted. It actually lifted. There is no other word for it. My son was here. My grandson was here. The house was about to have voices in it again. Voices that belonged to me. I stood up from the recliner faster than my knees wanted me to, and I went to the front door. Caleb hit me first. He came running up the walk in a little blue sweatshirt with a dinosaur on the front, and he yelled, "Grandpa," before he reached the porch, and he threw himself at my legs the way only a 4-year-old can throw himself at anything, with the complete confidence that he will be caught. I caught him. I picked him up. He weighed nothing. He smelled like apple juice in the inside of a car seat. He grabbed both sides of my face with his small hands and he said, "Grandpa, your face is scratchy." And I said, "I know, buddy. That's what grandpas are for." And he laughed like I had told the funniest joke in the world. Daniel came up behind him with a duffel bag over one shoulder. He looked tired. He looked thinner than he had 6 weeks before. There were 2 new lines on his forehead I did not remember. He gave me a one-arm hug, the kind we have given each other since he was about 17, and he said, "Hey, Pop, smells good in here." I said, "Pot roast." He said, "Mom's recipe." I said, "There is only one recipe." He almost smiled. Megan came up the walk last, with her purse on her shoulder and her sunglasses still on. She was wearing a cream-colored sweater I had never seen before, and white jeans, and shoes that did not look like they had ever been in a yard. She gave me a hug that was, in its way, a kind hug. She said, "Hi, Bob. The drive was awful." She always calls me Bob. I have told her, twice now, that nobody calls me Bob. She still calls me Bob. I said, "Come on in. Coffee's on." That is how it started. Warm. Genuinely warm. I want you to remember that, because in about 3 hours, it was going to go somewhere else. And when it did, I do not want you to think it was anything Megan had planned. She had not planned it. She had just walked into my house, my real house, the one I had lived in for 45 years, and she had started, almost without noticing she was doing it, to take inventory. The first hour was good. I will give it that. Caleb went straight for the basket of toys I keep by the recliner. It is the same basket that held Daniel's toys 40 years ago, and most of the toys in it are the same toys. There is a wooden train with a missing wheel. There is a fire truck that has lost its ladder. There is a stuffed bear that Helen had patched at the elbow with brown felt, because she said a bear should look like he had been through something. Caleb sat right down on the rug and started lining the toys up by size, which is exactly what Daniel used to do at the same age. And I had to turn my face toward the window for a second because I had not expected that to land in me the way it did. Daniel sat down on the couch and put his feet up on the coffee table, the way he used to when he was in high school. He did not even think about it. He just did it, the way a man does in his father's house when, for half a second, he forgets he is a grown man with a company and a mortgage and a wife who does not put her feet on coffee tables. Megan did not sit. She walked. She walked through the living room and along the hallway and into the kitchen and back out, the way a woman walks through a model home she is thinking about not buying. She was not unkind about it. She made small, approving noises. She said, "Oh, the light in here is nice," she said. "I always forget how big this kitchen is," she said. "Bob, did you redo the floor in the hallway?" I had not. The floor in the hallway is the same floor it was in 1982. But I did not correct her, because correcting Megan about a thing like that does not get anybody anywhere. I made coffee. I poured 3 cups. I asked Caleb if he wanted apple juice, and he did. And I poured it into the same plastic cup with the cartoon dog on it that I had bought for him when he was 2. He drank it sitting on the rug, with both hands around the cup, the way small children drink things, like every sip is the most important sip of their life. Daniel asked about my hearing. He always asks about my hearing. I told him it was the same, which was true. He asked about the truck. I told him I had put new tires on it in August. He asked if I had been getting out of the house. I told him I had been to Lucy's every Tuesday and to the hardware store on Brundage twice that month. And he laughed. And I laughed. And Megan said from the kitchen, "That's not really getting out, Bob." And the laugh stopped on my side of the room about half a second before it stopped on his. That was the first moment. I want to mark it, because looking back, that was the first moment of the afternoon when I felt the temperature change. It was small. It was just a sentence. But it was a sentence that took something I had said about my own life and corrected it, gently, the way you correct a child who has used the wrong word for a thing. I let it go. You let things go on Sundays. That is what Sundays are for. We ate at 3. I served the pot roast in the same heavy iron pot I had used for 30 years. The carrots were too big, the way Helen always cut them. The potatoes were the small red ones from the bag I keep in the pantry. I put a basket of rolls on the table, and I poured ice water into the glasses. And I sat down at my end, and Daniel sat down at his old place, and Caleb sat next to him in the booster seat I had pulled out of the hall closet. And Megan sat across from Daniel in Helen's chair. I do not think she knew it was Helen's chair. There was no marker on it. There was no reason for her to know. But it was Helen's chair, and when she sat down in it, I had to take a slow breath that I hoped nobody noticed. The pot roast was good. I will say that without false modesty. Helen had taught me to brown the meat first, hard, on all sides, before anything else went into the pot. And I had done that. The gravy had thickened the way it was supposed to. The onions had melted into it. Caleb ate 2 helpings, which is a sentence I had not expected to be able to say about a 4-year-old. And Daniel ate 3 rolls. And even Megan, who eats the way a person eats who has decided in advance what they are going to allow themselves, took seconds on the potatoes. For about 40 minutes, the dinner was what a Sunday dinner is supposed to be. Caleb told a long story about a turtle he had seen at a park in San Jose. A story that did not have an ending and did not need one. Daniel told me the company was hiring 2 more engineers in the new year. Megan told me about a remodel they were doing on the kitchen of their house in San Jose, and she described it in a way that suggested I would have an opinion about marble countertops, which I did not. But I nodded the way a man nods when a younger person is excited about something. There was no tension. There were no shadows. The light through the back window made a long, warm rectangle on the floor, and Caleb's spoon clinked against his bowl. And for a minute I thought, this is going to be a good Sunday after all. Then Megan put down her fork. She set it carefully on the rim of her plate, in that way she has of placing things, and she folded her hands together, and she looked at me across the table, and she said the sentence she had driven 5 hours to say. She said, "Bob, Daniel and I want to talk to you about the garage." There is a way a sentence lands in a room when it has been planned. You can feel it. The air around it is a little tighter than the air around the sentences that came before it. The person saying it has measured the words. They have rehearsed the words. They have, somewhere in the drive down, said the words out loud to their husband in the passenger seat to make sure the words come out the way they need to. That was the way Megan's sentence landed. I set my own fork down. I did not match her placing of it. I just set it down. I said, "All right." Daniel was looking at his plate. He was not eating anymore. He was rearranging a piece of carrot with the side of his fork, back and forth, the way he used to do when he was about 10 years old, and he had broken something and was waiting for his mother to bring it up. Megan went on. She had clearly planned the order. She started with how much they loved coming down. She started with how Caleb adored his grandpa. She started with how worried they were about me being out here by myself, which was a strange thing to start with, because they had not been worried enough about me being out here by myself to come down more than 3 times in the last 6 months. But I did not say that. You do not say a thing like that at a Sunday dinner. You file it. I filed it. Then she got to the garage. She said the garage was beautiful. She actually used that word, which surprised me. She said it was beautiful what I had built out there and what I had done with my hands. She said she had so much respect for it. And then she said the word but, and once she said the word but, I knew the rest of the sentence was the only part of the sentence that mattered. She said, "But, Bob, we worry. We worry that it's a lot for you to manage. We worry about you being out there with all those tools and all that equipment at your age, and us being 5 hours away. We worry about you tripping over something. We worry about a fire. We worry, honestly, about what happens if something happened to you out there and nobody knew." I let her talk. I have learned, over a long life, that when somebody is delivering a prepared statement, the kindest thing you can do is let them get to the end of it. She got to the end of it. The end of it was this. They wanted to clean out the garage. They wanted to keep, she said, anything that's really meaningful, and they wanted to get rid of the rest, the boxes and the parts and the lumber and what she called, and I am quoting her, the duplicates. Then they wanted to put down a rubber floor, the kind you see in a gym. They wanted to put in a treadmill and a set of weights and a mirror on the back wall, so that when they came down for visits, Daniel and Megan could exercise in the morning before Caleb woke up. She said it would also be good for me, that I should be moving more at my age. That the doctor at her gym in San Jose had said that strength training was the single most important thing for men over 65. She said it would be a gift. That was the word she used. A gift. I looked at Daniel. Daniel was still looking at his plate. I said, "What about the tools?" Megan said, "The tools, we'd keep the meaningful ones. We thought maybe a small chest in the corner. The rest we could donate. There are organizations that take used tools for trade schools." I said, "What about the blueprints on the wall?" She said, "Bob, those are wonderful, and we were thinking we could scan them, digitize them. They'd be safer that way. We could put them in a folder for you, on a thumb drive." I said, "What about the cabinet in the back?" She said, "The green one, we'd move it, or, if you wanted, we could go through it together. Sort it out." I said, "What about the thing under the cloth?" She said, "What thing under the cloth?" I did not answer her. There was a quiet at the table. Caleb, who had been moving a piece of bread around on his tray, looked up at the grown-ups, because 4-year-olds know quiet the way dogs know thunder. He looked at his mother. He looked at his father. He looked at me. He said, "Grandpa, are you sad?" I said, "No, buddy. Grandpa is fine. Eat your bread." He ate his bread. I turned to Daniel. I said, "Son, is this what you want to—" He did not look up right away. When he did, his eyes were not the eyes of the boy who used to find me at the bench and ask me what I was building. They were the eyes of a tired man who had been having a hard year and who wanted his wife to be happy and who had decided, somewhere in the last few weeks, that the easiest way to make his wife happy was to spend his father's garage. He said, "Pop, I think it could be good. I think Megan's right. I worry about you out here." I said, "All right." He said, "We don't have to do it all at once. We could start small. We could do it over a couple of trips." I said, "All right." Megan said, "Bob, we want to be honest with you. If you really cannot do this, if you really cannot let go of some of that stuff, then we have to think about how much we can be coming down. Caleb is getting older, and the visits, the way the house is right now, it's getting harder to do them with him here." That sentence I felt in a different place than the others. The others had landed in my chest. That one landed lower, in the bottom of my stomach, in the place where men carry the things they cannot say out loud. She had just told me, in so many words, that the price of my grandson coming back into this house was the garage. I sat there. I picked up my water glass. I took a long, slow drink. I set the glass back down on the table, in the wet ring it had made on the wood. I looked at Caleb. He was holding the last bite of his roll in both hands, and he was watching me, the way small children watch a grown-up when they are trying to figure out if everything is still okay. I smiled at him. I said, "How is your bread, buddy?" He said, "Good." I said, That's the best bread, isn't it? He nodded very seriously and went back to eating. I looked back at Megan. I said, I will think about it. Then I picked up my fork. I cut a piece of pot roast. I put it in my mouth. I chewed it slowly. I swallowed. I did not say another word about it for the rest of the meal. After dinner, while Megan loaded the dishwasher, Daniel took Caleb out to the front yard to throw a foam football he had bought at a gas station on the way down. I sat on the porch and watched them through the screen door. Daniel was not a natural with a football. He never had been. But Caleb did not know that. Caleb just knew that his father was throwing a ball at him, and that his father was laughing when he caught it, and laughing when he did not. And that is everything a 4-year-old needs from a Sunday afternoon. I watched them for a long time. I did not say anything. I had not figured out yet what I would say. After Caleb wore himself out, Megan took him into the spare bedroom to lay him down for a nap. Daniel came back inside and went into the guest bathroom. I heard the water run for a long time, longer than it takes to wash your hands. When he came out, his eyes looked like a man who had splashed cold water on his face. He said, I'm going to make a couple of calls. Work stuff. I'll be on the back porch if you need me. I said, take your time. He went out the back door. I went out the front. I sat on the front porch step, in the same spot where I had sat the night Helen and I had moved into this house. The night we had not yet had a couch delivered and had sat outside in lawn chairs eating sandwiches from a paper bag. I had been 28 years old. Helen had been 26. We had been the youngest people on the street. Now I was the oldest. I had outlived 3 of the original neighbors. 2 more were in homes. The rest had sold to people I did not know. I pulled a pack of cigarettes out of my shirt pocket. I had not smoked in years. I keep a pack in the shirt pocket the same way some men keep a pocket knife. I do not know why. I tapped one out, then I put it back in the pack. Then I tapped it out again. Then I put the pack on the porch rail and just sat there. The wind had died down. The dust had settled. The sun was about an hour from going behind the back fence. The afternoon had the kind of light that makes a man think about everything he has ever done, all at once, and not be able to sort it. That is when I heard Daniel's voice. He was on the back porch, on the other side of the house, talking on his phone. The way the wind was sitting, his voice carried, around the corner, along the side of the house, right to where I was on the front step. He could not see me. I could not see him. But I could hear him as clearly as if he had been sitting next to me. He was talking to somebody at the company. He used a name I did not know, a man's name. He sounded tired. He sounded the way he had sounded on the phone a month before, the night he had told me about technical challenges. He said, "No, I know. I know. We are going to have to deal with it, but I cannot get into it right now. I am down at my dad's." There was a pause. The other person said something. Daniel said, "Yeah, same as always. The house is the same. The garage is the same. He is the same. Megan is on him today about the garage. She is right, but it is not going to be a quick conversation." Another pause. Then Daniel said the sentence. He said, "My dad is just stuck in the past." Man, He's not going to grow up with the times. You can't drag him into the present. You know. You have to just love him where he is. I sat very still on the front step. I want to tell you, honestly, what I felt when I heard that sentence. I want to tell you because I am 68 years old, and I do not have the energy anymore to lie to you about a thing like this. I felt, first, a kind of cold start in my chest. I felt, second, a small clean cut. The kind a sharp blade leaves before the bleeding catches up. And I felt, third, a thing I had not felt in a long time. Not since the funeral. Not since the morning I had snapped the padlock shut on the cabinet. I felt invisible. It is one thing for a daughter-in-law to look at your garage and see clutter. That is a difference in language. That can be lived with. It is another thing for your own son. The boy whose first set of pliers you bought. The boy you taught how to change the oil in his first car. The boy whose hand you held in the hospital the night your wife died. To say to another man, on the phone, in the side yard of your house, that you are stuck in the past and cannot be dragged into the present. That is a different kind of sentence. That is a sentence that knocks a piece out of you. I did not move. I did not stand up. I did not let him know I had heard. I just sat there on the porch step, and I watched the sun finish its work behind the back fence, and I let the cold thing in my chest sit where it was sitting. After a while, Daniel came back inside through the back door. Megan came out of the spare room and said Caleb was asleep. The two of them sat in the living room and watched something on Megan's tablet, with the volume low. I sat on the front porch. I did not go in until it was almost dark. When I did go in, I walked through the living room without saying anything, and I went out the side door, and I crossed the yard to the garage, and I let myself in through the brass-knobbed door. I turned on the yellow bulb. I sat down on the rolling stool. I looked at the cabinet in the back corner. For the second night in a row, I thought about opening it. For the second night in a row, I did not. But I sat there a long time. I sat there until Megan came across the yard to find me and tell me, in a voice that was kinder than it had been at dinner, that they were going to bed. I told her I would be in soon. She nodded. She did not come any farther than the doorway. She did not step into the garage. I do not know if she even knew that she did not step into the garage. But she did not. She stood at the door, on the outside, and she said goodnight to me from there. And then she went back across the yard to the house. I stayed in the garage for another hour after that. When I finally turned off the yellow bulb and crossed the dark yard to the back door, I stopped halfway, in the middle of the grass, and I looked up at the sky. The stars over Bakersfield are not what they were when I was a boy. The city has gotten bigger, and the lights have gotten brighter, and the sky has gotten thinner. But you can still find a few of them if you look long enough. I found two that night. I do not know what they were. I am not a man who knows the names of stars. But I stood there in the wet grass, an old man in his slippers, and I looked at those two stars, and I said, out loud, just quiet enough that nobody in the house could hear me, "Helen, I do not know what to do." The stars did not answer. Stars never do. But the asking was the thing. The asking is always the thing. I went inside. I went to bed. I did not sleep. In the morning, they left at 9. Caleb hugged me at the door. He told me he loved me. He told me he wanted pot roast again next time. I told him I would have pot roast waiting for him whenever he came. Daniel hugged me one-armed and said, "Pop, we will talk soon." "All right?" I said. "All right, son." Megan hugged me too. As she was getting in the car, she set a small white card down on the kitchen counter, next to the salt and pepper chickens. She said, "Bob, this is just in case. They do garages, they do estates, they are good." Then she got in the passenger seat and closed the door. I stood in the doorway and waved as they backed out of the driveway. I waved until the car was around the corner and out of sight. Then I went back inside. The white card was still on the counter. I picked it up. It was the business card of a company called Clean Slate Removal. The logo was a green dumpster with a smiley face on the side. I held the card in my hand for a long time. Then I set it back down on the counter. I did not throw it away. I poured a cup of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. I looked at the empty chair across from me. I did not get up for a long, long while. That was the Sunday. For 3 weeks after that Sunday, I did not hear from my son. I want to be careful how I say this, because I do not want it to sound like I was waiting by the phone. I was not. A man my age does not wait by a phone. A man my age finds 100 small things to do between sunrise and dark, and the things get done, and the days go by, and the phone is just one more thing in the house that does or does not ring. But I will tell you the truth. Every time it did ring, in those 3 weeks, my chest went a little tight before I looked at the screen, and every time it was not Daniel, my chest went tight in a different way. I did not call him either. I want to be honest about that too. I could have. A father can always pick up a phone. But there is a thing about being a parent of a grown child that nobody warns you about. You spend the first 18 years teaching them everything, and you spend the rest of your life waiting for them to remember that you are still standing where you were when they walked away from it. You do not chase. You do not beg. You stand where you stood, and you keep the porch light on, and you wait to be remembered. So I did not call. I kept the porch light on. The days that followed had a shape to them. I would wake up at 5:30 without meaning to. I would lie in the dark for 10 minutes, listening to the house. I would get up, put on my robe, walk to the kitchen, look at Helen's recipe card on the fridge, make coffee. I would drink the coffee at the table by the window. Then I would go out to the garage. I did not work on anything in particular those weeks. I did what a man does in a place that has been his for 40 years. I oiled the bearings on the drill press. I sharpened the chisels in the wooden block by the bench. I cleaned the points on the wire wheel. I sorted a coffee can of mixed bolts into a small chest of drawers. By thread, by length, none of it needed doing. All of it needed doing. There is no difference, in a workshop, between a job that needs doing and a job a man needs to do. Tuesday I went to Lucy's. Donna brought me my eggs. She looked at me a moment longer than usual when she set them down, and she said, "Rob, you all right?" I said, "I'm fine. Donna," she said. "You look a little off," I said. "I'm always a little off. Donna, you just notice it more on Tuesdays." She laughed and went to the next booth. I ate my eggs. I read the paper. I left her a $5 tip on a $9 breakfast. Because that is what you do when a person has been bringing you eggs for 19 years and they notice you are a little off. In the second week, I drove out to the cemetery. I had not been there since August. Helen is buried at Greenlawn, on the south side of town, in a section under a row of pepper trees. The pepper trees were her idea. She had picked the plot herself, a year before she got sick, the way some women pick out a couch. I had thought it was morbid at the time. I do not think that anymore. I think she was just doing what she did with everything else in our life, which was getting ahead of it before it got ahead of us. I brought a small bunch of flowers from the grocery store, yellow ones. She had liked yellow. I knelt down on one knee, the one that still bends without complaining, and I cleared a few pepper leaves off the stone, and I sat back on my heels, and I looked at her name and her dates, and the line underneath that said, "Beloved wife and mother." I told her about the Sunday. I told her about Megan and the gym floor and the card on the kitchen counter. I told her about Daniel on the back porch and what I had heard him say. I told her in the same voice I had been using to talk to her for 4 years, which is the voice a man uses when he is alone in a car and pretending he is not. I said, "I do not know what to do. Helen, he's our son. I do not want to fight him. But I do not know how to let them put a gym in there either." I waited a while. The wind went through the pepper trees and made the small noise pepper trees make, which is closer to whispering than to anything else. I had the strangest feeling that she was about to answer me. It is the kind of feeling that comes to a widower more often than people think. It is not crazy. It is not a sign you have lost your grip. It is just a thing your heart does when it has been pointed at one person for 41 years. It does not know any other direction to point. She did not answer. She has never answered. But the wind kept moving in the pepper trees, and after a while I stood up, brushed the dirt off my pants, and walked back to the truck. I sat in the cab for a long time before I turned the key. I sat there until a young woman in another car pulled up 2 rows over, with flowers of her own, and I figured I had better give her her privacy and get going. That was the second week. The third week was quieter. I think I had decided, somewhere in the middle of it, that I was going to wait. Just wait. Let the Sunday settle. Let Daniel call when he called. Let Megan be Megan. Let the white card stay on the kitchen counter, next to the chickens, where I could see it but not have to do anything about it. There is a kind of waiting that is the same as forgiving in advance. I do not know if that is wisdom or just tiredness. At my age, the two get hard to tell apart. I went to bed on the Wednesday of the third week feeling, for the first time, almost steady. I had eaten a sandwich. I had watched a little television. I had locked the front door at 9 and the back door at 9:03 and the garage at 9:15. The way I have locked them in that order for 45 years. I had taken my hearing aid out and put it in the small plastic case on the nightstand. I had set my reading glasses on top of the paperback I was working through, which was a Western that Helen would have liked. I had turned off the lamp. I had been asleep for about an hour and a half when the phone rang. I do not sleep with the ringer loud because I do not get calls at night. But it was loud enough. It cut through the dark and through the dream I was having, which I do not remember now except that Frank Delgado had been in it again, standing on my left side, holding a piece of paper. I opened my eyes. The clock on the nightstand said 10:53. The phone said Daniel. I sat up in bed slower than I would have at 30. My back has opinions about that kind of movement now. I picked up the phone. I put my reading glasses on. I cleared my throat once. I answered. I said, "Son." He said, "Pop." The voice on the other end was not the voice that had said, "Pop, we'll talk soon," 3 weeks before. The voice on the other end was the voice of a man who had been awake too long and had run out of the things a man uses to stay awake. There was a thinness in it, a peeled quality. I had heard voices like that before. I had used a voice like that before, in the small hours of bad shifts, when something was wrong with the plant, and the engineer at the other end of the radio could not pretend any longer that he had it under control. He said, "Pop, are you up?" I said, "I am now." He said, "I'm sorry to call this late. I would not have called this late." I said, "Son, what is it?" There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing. I could hear, behind him, the hum of a room. Not a living room. Not a kitchen. A bigger room. A room with fans in it. I knew the sound. I had spent my life in rooms with fans in it. He said, "We've got a situation." I waited. He said, "Pop, I don't even know how to start this. I don't know if you're going to understand it. I don't mean that the wrong way. I just mean it is a technical problem, and I do not want to waste your time." I said, "Son, start." He took a breath. He started. I am going to tell you what he told me, and I am going to tell it the way a man my age can tell it, because I am not going to pretend in this story that I understood every word my son said the way one of his engineers would have. I am going to tell you what I heard, and I am going to tell you what I knew, and where the two of them met is the place where this story turns. What he told me was this. The company had built its whole product on a set of servers, which is a thing I understand the way most people my age understand it, which is that it is a row of computers stacked in a room, doing work nobody can see. The servers ran on cards. The cards had chips on them, and the chips had jobs to do, and the jobs added up to a thing the company sold to other companies for a great deal of money. The trouble was, the company had been growing fast, and the way it had been growing had outpaced the parts they had been buying. The newer parts they had bought in the last year had run into trouble with the older parts they had bought 5 and 6 years ago. The older parts were a kind of hardware that nobody made anymore. The vendor had gone out of business. The chips were not stocked anywhere. The whole front end of the system, the part that handled the load coming in from their biggest customer, had been resting on a piece of hardware that, in plain English, was a museum piece. 2 days ago, the museum piece had failed. Not a soft failure, a hard one, the kind that takes the whole shelf down. They had been running on a backup that was not supposed to take more than 4 hours of wait, and it had been taking the wait for a day and a half, and that backup was starting to show stress. They had a customer contract that depended on the system being up. The contract was the biggest contract the company had ever signed. If they could not deliver on it inside of 72 hours, the customer had the right to walk, with penalties that ran into the millions. If the customer walked, 2 more customers were going to walk behind them. because they all talked to each other in that industry. And the company Daniel had built was going to be done before Christmas. He told me all of this in about 3 minutes. He told it in the order of a man who had been telling it to himself, in his head, for 36 hours. He said, "Pop, we have had every engineer we have on this. We have called in 2 consultants. We have called the company that bought what used to be the vendor. Nobody has the part. Nobody knows how to fabricate the part. Nobody can read the schematic the way it was drawn, because it was drawn in a way nobody draws anymore." He paused. He said, "Pop." I said, "Son." He said, "It is a flow controller board. It is an old industrial flow controller board, the kind you would have seen in a refinery in the 80s. We pulled it for a reason. The new stuff did not exist when we built the front end. So we used the old hardware, because it was reliable. Now it has failed, and we cannot make another one." I sat in the dark in my bedroom. I had my reading glasses on. I had my robe pulled across my knees. I had a phone pressed against my right ear, because the right ear is the one that still hears. I closed my eyes. I saw, behind my closed eyes, a workbench in 1989. I saw a sheet of vellum, the kind we used to draw on. I saw Frank Delgado on my left, with a mechanical pencil between his teeth, his hard hat pushed back on his head, and a streak of black grease across the bridge of his nose. I saw him laughing at something I had just said, a thing I cannot remember now. I saw, on the vellum between us, a hand-drawn schematic, lines and angles and small, careful notations, a signature box in the bottom right corner with 2 signatures in it. Mine first, Frank second. I said, "Son." He said, "Yeah." I said, "What is the part?" He said, "The model number." It was the part. It was the part Frank and I had drawn in 1989. There was a quiet on the line then that was a different kind of quiet from the quiet at the dinner table 3 weeks before. It was the kind of quiet a man only gets a few times in his life. It is the quiet that happens when a thing he has been carrying for a long time, without knowing what it was for, suddenly turns out to be exactly the right shape for the thing the world has just handed him. I said, "Son, do you remember the cabinets above the workbench, the flat ones, the long, thin ones, that look like they are holding paper?" He said, Yeah, Pop. I remember them." I said, "There is a cardboard tube in the 3rd one from the left, brown, with a red rubber cap on the top. There is a number written on the cap in black marker. The number ends in 89. He said, "Pop, what is in the tube?" I said, "Son, I am the man who drew that part." There was a sound on the other end of the line that was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when something inside them moves in a direction it has not moved in for a long time. I said, "I drew it in 1989 with Frank Delgado. Some of you may not remember Frank. He died in the explosion at the Kern River plant in '90. He was my best friend. We were building flow controllers in those years, by hand, the way they were built then. I have the original drawing in that tube. I have the materials list. I have the dimensions. I have my notes in the margin. I know that part better than the man who eventually patented it. Because the man who eventually patented it bought the design from the company we both worked for. And the company we both worked for got it from us. I let that sit a moment. Then I said, "Son, I can build it. I can build it tonight." He said, "Pop." I said, "I am going to need you to do something for me first. I am going to need you to sit down. Wherever you are standing right now, sit down. Take a breath. Then go and find someone there who can do what I tell them to do over the phone. Because we are going to start with a measurement, and I am going to need to know what we are working with on your end before I tell you what I am going to do on mine." He said, "Pop, I'm sitting down." I said, "Good. Now get me a measurement." I got out of bed. I put on a pair of jeans and a work shirt over my undershirt, the way a man dresses when he knows he is going to be on his feet until something is done. I put my hearing aid back in. I put my boots on. I left the bedroom light on, because I was not coming back to it for a while. I walked through the dark house. I went out the side door. I crossed the yard. I turned on the yellow bulb in the garage. It was the third night in a row I had stood under that bulb. The first 2 nights I had thought about the cabinet and not opened it. This night, I did not look at the cabinet. I looked at the long, flat drawer cabinet over the workbench. The third one from the left. I opened it. The brown cardboard tube was right where I had put it in 1991, after Frank's funeral, when I had cleaned out my desk at the plant and brought home everything I had not been able to leave there. The red rubber cap was a little brittle now. The black marker had faded but was still legible. The number ended in 89. I took the tube down. I held it in my hands a moment. It was light. It had always been light. I had forgotten how light it was. I set the tube on the workbench. I picked up the phone. I said, "Son, I am in the garage. Get me your measurement." He said, "Pop." I said, "Son, talk to me like we are at work." There was a small pause. Then he did. He talked to me like we were at work. He gave me numbers. He gave me tolerances. He gave me, over the next 20 minutes, every piece of information a man needs when he is about to make a part the world has decided it does not make anymore. I wrote it all down in pencil on the back of an envelope from the electric company. When he was done, I said, "Stay by the phone. I will call you back in 2 hours." He said, "Pop." I said, "I will call you back." I hung up. I uncapped the tube. I slid out the vellum. It unrolled on the workbench, all 12 feet of it, the way it had unrolled on a table at the Kern River plant in 1989, with my younger hands holding one end and Frank's younger hands holding the other. The signatures were still there in the bottom right corner. Mine. Frank's. I sat down on the rolling stool. I put on my reading glasses. I read the drawing. It read like a letter from a friend. I want to tell you what it is like to read your own handwriting from 37 years ago. It is like meeting a younger man at a diner counter and recognizing him before he recognizes you. The lines are tighter than my lines are now. The numbers are smaller. The cross on the 7 has a little kick to it that I have lost. The whole drawing has the carefulness of a man who is still afraid of being wrong, which I do not think I am anymore, at 68, in any direction that matters. The drawing was for a flow controller assembly. I will not bore you with what it does. It moves liquid from one place to another under conditions where you cannot afford to guess. The chip on it tells a valve when to open and how far. The valve obeys, because we made the valve obey. In a refinery, that is the difference between a working day and a day on the news. In my son's company, 37 years later, it was the difference between a working contract and a company that went under. The geometry of the part was what mattered. The tolerances, the way one piece sat against another, the exact angles at which the seating surfaces met. Modern manufacturing could not make this part anymore, because modern manufacturing had moved on from the lathes and the mills and the hand-fit assemblies that had built it. But I still had a lathe. I still had a mill. I still had hands. I cleared the bench. I want you to picture this, because the picture matters. I cleared the bench all the way down to the steel. I wiped the steel with a clean rag. I laid the vellum out flat with my coffee can full of mixed bolts at one end, and Helen's wooden recipe box at the other, the one she had kept her index cards in. I had brought it out from the kitchen for the first time in 4 years. It was the only thing in the house heavy enough and clean enough to hold down a corner of an old blueprint without bleeding ink onto it. I pulled the yellow bulb down a little closer on its chain. I rolled the stool over to the bench. I started. The first thing I needed was material. The part was made of a kind of bronze that nobody uses for this kind of work anymore, because the modern alloys are stronger and easier to machine. But I had the bronze. I had a piece of round bar, about 6 inches in diameter, that I had bought in 1983 at a closeout sale from a tool shop in Oildale that was going out of business. I had bought it because it had been cheap and because Frank had said, that day, "Rob, you never know when you might need bronze." And we had laughed, because in 1983 a man like me needed bronze about once a year, and a piece this big would last a lifetime. It had lasted a lifetime. It was leaning against the back wall of the garage, behind the lumber rack, with a green tag on it in Helen's handwriting that said bronze, round, thick. She had labeled almost everything in here in the late 90s, when she had gone through a period of trying to make the garage make sense to anybody but me. The labels were still there. Most of them were faded. Hers still had the loops on the L's. I dragged the bronze bar to the bench. It weighed more than I remembered. My knees said so. My back said so. I told my knees and my back to keep their opinions to themselves for the next few hours, because we had work to do, and I would owe them all the rest they wanted in the morning. I marked the bar with a piece of soapstone from the can on the bench. I cut a length from it with the bandsaw, slow and steady, the way you cut bronze when you are not in a hurry to dull a blade. The smell of the cutting came up around me. It is a smell people who have not lived in a machine shop do not know. It is the smell of warm metal and oil and a little bit of something almost sweet, like burned brown sugar. I had not smelled that smell in maybe a year and a half. It went into me, and it lit something up that had not been lit in a long time. I moved the cut piece to the lathe. I will not walk you through every cut. I will not tell you every pass. There would be no point. What I will tell you is that I worked in the way a man works when he has been doing a thing for 40 years, and his hands know more about it than his head does. I set the speeds without thinking. I chose the tools without looking. My right hand, the one with 2 missing fingertips, did the work of a whole hand because the parts of it that were not missing had learned, over 40 years, to cover for the parts that were. About an hour in, I had the rough turn done. The piece had stopped being a piece of bar and had started to be apart. You could see the shoulders. You could see where the bore was going to go. You could see the future of the thing in the present of it, which is how it works in a shop. A thing on a lathe is always halfway between what it was and what it is going to be, and a man on a lathe is always the same. I called Daniel. I said, "Son." He said, "Pop." I said, "I am about an hour in. I will be done by 4, 5 at the latest." There was a quiet on the line. Then he said, in a voice that was not the voice of the founder of a company or the husband of Megan or the tired man on the back porch, but the voice of the boy who used to come out to the garage at 9 years old with a notebook in his hand. "Pop, are you serious?" I said, "Son, I am serious." He said, "Pop." I said, "Stay by the phone. Do not let anybody touch the rest of the system. Tell your engineers that whatever they have been doing for the last day and a half, they should stop doing, because they are going to make it worse. Tell them to wait. Tell them help is coming." He said, "Pop, I do not even know how to tell them what help is." I said, "Tell them it is your father. Tell them I built one of these in 1989. Tell them I am building one tonight. Tell them I will be there in the morning." He said, "Pop, you don't have to drive up here. I can send somebody." I said, "Son, I am bringing it myself." He said, "Pop." I said, "Stay by the phone." I hung up. I went back to the lathe. I went back to work. The next 4 hours, I am not going to tell you about in detail. They were the kind of hours that, when a man my age has them, he does not want to share them with anybody, because they belong to him in a way that does not survive being shared. They were quiet. They were focused. They were the kind of hours where the body and the mind and the hands all line up in the same direction, and the past and the present do too. And a man who has felt invisible for 3 weeks does not feel invisible anymore, because he is busy being exactly who he has always been. I will tell you only this. About halfway through, somewhere between the second pass on the bore and the first cut of the seating surface, I happened to look up. The clock on the wall said 1:47 in the morning. The yellow bulb was steady. The vellum was still flat on the bench, with Helen's recipe box holding down the corner, and the photograph above the bench, the one of me and Frank in our hard hats, was lit just enough by the bulb that I could see Frank's grin. I looked at him a long second. I said, out loud, in a voice that was a little rougher than I had meant it to be, "Frank, we are using it tonight. Brother. Just like you said." The garage did not answer. Frank did not answer. They never do. But I felt, just for that moment, the way a man feels when he is not working alone. I went back to the lathe. I finished the part at 4:11 in the morning. I cleaned it. I checked it. I checked it again. I held it up under the yellow bulb and I turned it slowly in my hand, and I looked at it from every angle a man can look at a thing he has made. It was right. I wrapped it in a clean piece of cotton flannel I had cut from one of Helen's old quilting scraps. I put it in a small wooden box I had built years ago for a different purpose and never used. I tied the box shut with twine. I took the original vellum off the bench, rolled it carefully, slid it back into the brown cardboard tube, and capped it with the red rubber cap. I tucked the tube under my arm. I did not look at the army green cabinet on my way out. I turned off the yellow bulb. I locked the garage. I crossed the dark yard to the house. I went inside. I changed my shirt. I picked up the keys to the F-150 off the hook by the door. I poured the last of the coffee from the pot into the thermos Helen had bought me in 1998 for Father's Day. I put the small wooden box on the passenger seat of the truck. I laid the cardboard tube across the dash. I started the engine at 4:43 in the morning. I backed out of the driveway of the only house I had ever owned, and I pointed the truck north, toward San Jose, toward my son. The road was empty. The sky was still dark. Somewhere out in the dark, the freight train was running its line. I could not hear it from the cab of the truck, but I knew it was there. I drove with both hands on the wheel. I drove the way a man drives when he is bringing something that matters to somebody he loves. I drove the way I had driven Helen to the hospital 4 years before, on the morning we already knew. I drove the way I had driven Daniel home from Cal Poly 26 years before, with the back of the truck loaded down with the start of his adult life. I drove the way I had driven 50 years before that, when I was a boy, and the road was still new to me, and I did not know yet that a road, for a man who lives long enough, is mostly the same road, traveled with different cargo. The cargo that morning was a small wooden box and a cardboard tube, and the part of me that had been waiting, without knowing it was waiting, for somebody in my family to need exactly what only I could give them. I turned onto Highway 99. I headed north. The sun came up somewhere south of Lost Hills. It came up the way it does in the valley in late autumn, slow and pink and unhurried, with the fog burning off the fields on either side of the road. I had the radio off. I had the windows cracked. I had the thermos between my knees. I had Frank Delgado's name in my head, not as a sadness, but as a kind of company. By 8 in the morning, I was in San Jose. By 8:10, I was at the door of my son's office. He was standing inside the lobby. He had been standing there, I would learn later, since 6. He saw me through the glass. He came out. He did not say anything for a second. He just looked at me. I held up the wooden box. He took it in both hands, the way Caleb had taken the apple juice cup 3 weeks before, with both hands around it, like every part of it mattered. Then my son, who is 36 years old and runs a company worth more than every house on my street put together, put his forehead down against mine, the way he used to do when he was 8, and he stood there for a long time, and his shoulders shook. I did not say anything. I did not have to. That was the night the phone rang. The lobby of my son's company was the kind of place a man like me notices but does not belong in. The floors were polished concrete. The ceilings went up 2 stories. There was a couch against the back wall that looked like it had never been sat on. There was a glass case near the front desk, with 3 small awards in it, and a wall behind the desk, with the company name on it in letters made out of something that was not quite wood and not quite metal. I did not ask what it was. Daniel let go of me after a long while. He stepped back. He wiped his eyes with the heel of one hand the way he had at 16 when he had not wanted me to know he had been crying about a girl. He looked at the wooden box in his other hand. He looked at me. He said, "Pop, come on." I followed him through a door behind the front desk, down a hallway with photographs on the walls of people I did not know, and into a room that hummed. The room was not large. It was cold. There were 2 long racks of equipment along the side walls, and a third in the middle, and the air smelled the way a server room smells, which is the smell of fans pushing dust off plastic. 3 young men and 1 young woman were inside the room when we walked in. They were standing around a piece of equipment on a rolling cart, and they were arguing in a low, tired way. The kind of arguing that people do when they have run out of new things to argue about and are just rehearsing the old ones. They stopped when Daniel walked in. They turned. They looked at me. I want to tell you what I saw on their faces, because it is part of the story. I saw, first, surprise. I was not what they had been expecting. I had on the same work shirt I had put on at 11 o'clock the night before. There was bronze dust on my forearms that I had not been able to wash off in the hurry. My hair was the hair of a man who had been awake for 30 hours. My boots had cement dust on them from the floor of the garage. I saw, second, doubt. I do not blame them. They were young engineers in a company in trouble, and a 36-year-old founder had just brought his 68-year-old father in from Bakersfield and was about to tell them that this man was going to fix the thing they had not been able to fix. And I saw, third, in a couple of them, the beginning of something else. I saw the look a young engineer gets when he is too tired to be proud anymore. The look that says, "All right, show me. I am not too far gone to learn." That was the look I worked with. Daniel introduced me. He said, "This is my father, Robert Hollis. He spent 34 years in industrial mechanical engineering. He is the man who originally designed the flow controller board we have been trying to replace. He has just driven up from Bakersfield with a hand-built replacement part and the original schematic. We are going to do what he tells us to do for the next 3 hours." Nobody said anything. Then the young woman, who was maybe 28, with her hair pulled back and a coffee cup in her hand that I could tell was empty by the way she was holding it, said, "Yes, sir. Where do you want us?" I said, "I want you at the bench. We are going to start by getting the failed board out of the rack without doing any more damage to the seating. Then we are going to clean the seating. Then we are going to fit the new part, and we are going to test it in stages. We are not going to rush. We are going to be slow on purpose. Slow is how this thing gets done right." She nodded. I said, "Son, set the wooden box down on that table. Carefully, untie the twine. Take the flannel off. Lay the part on the flannel. Do not touch the seating surfaces with your fingers. Use the cotton glove I put in the box." He did. They watched him do it. When the part came out of the flannel and sat there on the table, under the cold ceiling lights, the room got quieter. There is a thing that happens in a room full of engineers when a piece of well-made hardware comes out of a box. They get quiet. They get respectful. They do not need to be told to. The work tells them. One of the young men, a tall one with a beard, leaned in a little. He said, "Sir, is that bronze?" I said, "It is." He said, "You machined that last night." I said, "I did." He said, "Sir, that is beautiful work." I said, "Thank you, son." I had not been called sir like that, in that tone, in a long time. I had not been called son in that tone by anybody but my father. And my father has been gone since 1996. But the young man with the beard called me sir, and I called him son back. And that was the moment, I think, when the room shifted. After that, they were ready to work. We worked for 3 hours. I will not walk you through it. The details would not mean much to most of you, and the ones they would mean something to do not need me to walk them through it, because they have done their own version of it in their own work, in their own kitchens or barns or shops, on their own bad mornings. What I will tell you is this. The young engineers worked the way young engineers should work, which is to say, they did exactly what they were told, and they asked good questions when something was not clear. The part fit. It fit on the first try, because I had measured it on the second try the night before, and on the third, and on the fourth. We seated it. We bolted it. We checked the connections. We powered the section back up in stages, one at a time, the way you bring a refinery back online after a shutdown. And at each stage, we waited a little longer than we had to, because the cost of being wrong was higher than the cost of being slow. At 11:15 in the morning, the system came back up. The young woman, the one with the empty coffee cup, looked at her screen for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "We are green across the board." The tall young man with the beard turned around and put both hands on top of his head, the way young men do when something has happened that they need a second to take in. Daniel did not say anything. He stood with his back against the rack, and he closed his eyes, and he stayed that way for almost a full minute. I picked up the cotton flannel from the table. I folded it. I put it back in the wooden box. I tied the twine. I said, "Son." Daniel opened his eyes. I said, "I am going to head home." He said, "Pop." "No, Pop. You have been awake for over a day. You have been driving since 5 in the morning. You are not driving back. Stay. Stay in our guest room. Megan would want you to. We will all eat dinner. Caleb is at preschool, but he gets out at 2 and he would lose his mind to see you. Pop, please." I said, "Son, I appreciate it, but I have to get back." He said, "Why?" I thought about that. I thought about it the way a man thinks when he is being asked an honest question by his son in a server room in San Jose. I thought about it because Daniel deserved a real answer. I said, "Because I need to be in the garage tonight. There is something out there I have been getting ready to do for 4 years, and I think I am finally ready to do it. And I do not want to be away from home when I do it. That is all I can tell you right now." He looked at me a long second. He nodded. He said, "Pop, thank you." I said, "Son, you are welcome." I picked up the cardboard tube from where I had set it on the table. I held it out to him. I said, "This belongs with you now." He took it. He held it like a man holds something his father has just given him, which is the way it should be held. I said, "It is the original. I have copies. You keep that." He said, "Papa." I said, "Son, go home tonight. Sleep. Then come see me. Bring Megan. Bring Caleb. Come on Saturday. Stay the night." I am going to make pot roast. There is something I want to show you. He said, Pop, what is it? I said, Saturday. I shook his hand. The young engineers were still standing in a loose ring around the rack, not sure where to put themselves. I nodded at each of them. The young woman with the empty coffee cup nodded back. The tall young man with the beard reached out and shook my hand and said, Sir, it was an honor. I told him the honor had been mine. I meant it. I walked back through the hallway. I walked back through the lobby. I walked out into the sun. The morning had turned bright. The air in San Jose has its own smell, which is not better or worse than the air in Bakersfield. Just different. I walked to the truck. I climbed in. I sat with my hands on the steering wheel for a minute before I started the engine. I will tell you what I felt, sitting there. I felt the way I had used to feel at the end of a long shift in 1988, when the plant was running clean and the gauges were where they were supposed to be, and a man could pour himself a cup of coffee and look out the window at the sunrise. I felt the satisfaction of a thing that had been built right and was now working. I did not feel proud. I want to be clear about that. Pride is what you feel when you have something to prove. I did not have anything to prove anymore. What I felt was something quieter and older. It was the feeling of a job done. Just that. A job done. I started the engine. I pulled out of the parking lot. I drove south toward home. I did not stop, except once for gas in Coalinga, until I turned into my own driveway in Bakersfield at 4:10 in the afternoon. The next 3 days were quiet in a different way than they had been before. I slept 14 hours that first night. I did not mean to. I sat down in the recliner at 6 in the evening to take what I told myself would be a short rest, and I woke up at 8 the next morning, with the television showing the morning news and my reading glasses still on my nose. I had not slept that long in a stretch since before Helen died. My body had been carrying something it had been ready to put down. Thursday I went out to the garage. I did not work on anything. I sat at the bench. I drank coffee from the thermos. I looked at the photograph of Frank. I said, Brother, we got it done. Frank did not say anything. I had not expected him to, but I sat with him a while. Friday morning, my phone rang at 6:15. It was Daniel. He said, Pop, the contract is saved. They signed yesterday. We are good. I love you. Pop, we will see you tomorrow. That was the whole call. I did not need more. He did not need more. After we hung up, I went out to the garage. I stood in the middle of the floor. I looked at the army green cabinet in the back corner. I looked at the shape under the canvas drop cloth along the side wall. I looked at the long, flat drawer cabinet over the bench, the third drawer from the left, the empty space where the cardboard tube had been. Then I took the padlock off the army green cabinet. I did not do it the way a man does a thing he has been dreading. I did it the way a man does a thing he is finally ready for. I took the key out of the small leather pouch I had kept in the top drawer of my dresser for 4 years. I crossed the garage. I unlocked the padlock. I lifted it out of the hasp. I set it down on the bench. I did not open the cabinet doors yet. I sat back down on the rolling stool. I looked at the cabinet. I let myself feel what I had not let myself feel in 4 years, which was the readiness to look at what was inside. I want to tell you what was in the cabinet now. I have made you wait for it, and that is because you needed to wait. A story is partly about what is inside the locked cabinet, but it is mostly about why the cabinet has been locked, and you cannot understand the first one until you understand the second. I locked that cabinet on the night after Helen's funeral, because what was inside it was not finished. What was inside it had been the project Helen and I had been working on, together, in the evenings, for the last year and a half of her life. It had not been a project most people would have understood as a project a couple worked on together. It had not been a quilt. It had not been a garden. It had been, of all things, a small wooden bicycle for a child, a balance bike, the kind you give a small boy when he is just starting to figure out how his legs work in relation to the rest of him. We had not had a grandchild yet when we started it. Helen had wanted to start it anyway. She had said, "Robert, I have a feeling. I have a feeling we are going to have a grandson, and I have a feeling it is going to be soon, and I want to have it ready." I had laughed at her. I had said, "Helen, I am 63. I am not a furniture maker." She had said, "Robert, you have made things harder than a bicycle for 40 years. You are going to make this one with me." And so we had. We had picked the wood together, red oak for the frame, ash for the handlebar, walnut for the seat. We had drawn it together on a piece of butcher paper that I still had, in the cabinet, folded in quarters. Helen had drawn the shape. I had drawn the joinery. She had picked the angles. I had picked the fasteners. We had worked on it on Saturday afternoons and on Wednesday evenings, with the radio on, with the door of the garage open if the weather was right, with the smell of sawdust and Helen's hand cream filling up the corner of the garage where she would sit on a stool and rub linseed oil into the wood. Slow circles. The way she did everything that mattered. We were 2 months from being done with it when she got the diagnosis. 4 months later, she was gone, and the bicycle had sat, 3/4 finished, in the army green cabinet, with the rough places still rough and the finishing still not done, for 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days. I had not been able to open the cabinet because I had not been able to finish the bicycle without her, and I had not been able to give it away or throw it out, because Helen had carved something into the top tube. With a small chisel she had bought at a flea market in Tehachapi, 2 months before she got sick. She had carved a name. She had carved Caleb. This was a thing that had bothered me, in a small way, for 4 years. Helen had carved that name 8 months before Daniel and Megan had told us they were going to try for a baby. She had carved it more than a year before Caleb was conceived. She had carved it almost 2 years before Caleb was born, and they told us his name. I had asked her, the night she did it. I had said, "Helen, why Caleb?" She had said, "Robert, I had a dream last night about a little boy with curly hair, and his name was Caleb, and he was riding this bike, and he was laughing. So that is the name." I had said, "Helen, you cannot put a name on a bicycle for a child who does not exist yet." She had said, "Robert, I have been right about everything we have ever done together. Trust me on this." I had trusted her. I had not asked her again. She had carved the name with the chisel and we had moved on. 2 years and 3 months after she carved that name, my grandson was born, in a hospital in San Jose, and Daniel called me from the hallway outside the delivery room, and he said, "Pop, It's a boy, 8 pounds, 1 ounce, healthy. We are going to name him Caleb. I had been sitting at the kitchen table when he called. Helen had been gone 5 months by then. I had set the phone down on the table after the call, and I had walked out to the garage, and I had stood in front of the locked cabinet for almost an hour, and I had not been able to open it. Because if I opened it, I was going to see her handwriting on a piece of butcher paper and her chisel marks on a piece of red oak, and I was going to have to admit, out loud, in my own garage, that she had been right about something I would never get to tell her she had been right about. I had not been ready then. I had not been ready a year later, when Caleb turned 1, and I had bought him a soft cloth ball at the store instead of bringing out the bicycle. I had not been ready when he turned 2, when he turned 3, when he turned 4. Some nights I had walked out to the garage and put 2 fingers on the padlock, the way I had done the night this story started, and I had not been able to take the next step. But on the Friday morning after I had built the flow controller, after my son had hugged me in a lobby in San Jose, after I had driven the road home with a feeling in my chest that I had not had in 4 years, I sat on the rolling stool in the garage and I looked at the open hasp on the army green cabinet, and I understood that something had finally lined up. The same way the part had lined up on the rack in San Jose. The same way the past and the present had lined up on the bench at 1:47 in the morning. The same way a thing lines up when the man holding it has waited the right amount of time. I stood up. I walked over. I put my hands on the handles of the cabinet doors. I opened them. There it was. The frame in red oak, exactly the way we had left it. The ash handlebar, with its slight curve, sanded almost to glass. The walnut seat, oiled by Helen's own hand 4 years before. Helen's chisel sitting on a shelf inside the cabinet. The wooden handle worn where her thumb had pressed against it. The butcher paper, folded, with our drawing on it. A small canvas pouch with the rest of the hardware. And, in the place she had carved it, on the top tube, the letters CALEB, deep and clean and unmistakably hers. I stood there a long time. I cried. I am 68 years old, and I cried. Standing in my own garage on a Friday morning. The way a man cries when he has been carrying a thing alone for 4 years, and the weight of it finally lets him put it down. It was not a long cry. It was a quiet one. I did not make any noise. The tears just went where tears go. Then I took the bicycle out of the cabinet. I carried it to the bench. I set it down. I picked up a piece of sandpaper, and I sat on the stool, and I started, very gently, on the rough places that we had not finished. I had work to do before Saturday. Saturday came soft and gray. The fog had not lifted off the fields by mid-morning. The neighborhood was quiet the way late November Saturdays are quiet, with the leaves down off the elm at the corner and the wind not yet up. I made the pot roast at 10. I set the table for 4. I put a fresh slice of lemon in each glass of water, because Helen had said it made the table look like somebody had thought about it. I had the bicycle in the garage, under a clean drop cloth I had laid over it that morning. The finishing was done. The hardware was tightened. The seat was on. The handlebars were set at the right height for a small boy of 4. I had stayed up until almost midnight Friday. Working on it, my back had a few opinions about that this morning. I did not listen to them. They got in at 12:30. I heard the car. I went to the front door. Caleb hit me first. He always does. He yelled, "Grandpa," before he was halfway up the walk, and he threw himself at my legs, and I caught him, and he grabbed both sides of my face with his small hands and said, "Grandpa, you got more scratchy." And I said, "Buddy, that happens between visits." And he laughed. Daniel came up behind him. He hugged me. It was not a one-arm hug this time. It was both arms. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Megan came up last. She was carrying a glass casserole dish covered with foil. She had not brought a casserole dish to my house in 3 years. She had stopped bringing food because, I think, she had not believed I would eat it. She held the dish out toward me with both hands. She said, "I made a corn pudding. Daniel said it was your favorite from when he was a kid. I asked his aunt for the recipe. I took the dish," I said. "Thank you, Megan." She looked at me a second longer than she usually did. She said, "Bob, can we sit down somewhere before we eat?" I said, "Of course." We sat in the living room. Caleb had already gone to the basket of toys. Daniel sat on the couch. Megan sat next to him. I sat in the recliner. Megan said, "I owe you an apology." She did not look at me the way she usually did when she said something to me. She did not have the look of a woman performing a planned sentence. She had the look of a woman who had been awake some nights, in her own house, and had decided to say a thing that did not have a script. She said, "I was wrong about the garage. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about a lot of things. And I am not going to try to list them all, because if I list them all, I will start crying and I will not get through the apology. But I want you to know that I have been thinking. Since Daniel came home and told me what you did, I have been thinking about how I came down here 3 weeks ago, and what I said, and the card I left on the counter. I have been thinking about the way I have walked through your house. I have been thinking about your wife, who I never really got to know, and who I think I have been a little bit afraid of, even though I have never said that to anybody. And I owe you an apology. I am sorry. I am really, deeply sorry." I did not say anything for a moment. I looked at Daniel. Daniel had his hand on Megan's knee. He was looking at me with the eyes of a man who was waiting to see what his father would do. I said, "Megan." She said, "Yes." I said, "Thank you for saying that. I forgive you." There was not anything to forgive in some ways, and in other ways there was, and either way, I forgive you. I want to say something back, if you will let me. She nodded. I said, "You are not the first person to look at me and think I needed to be managed. You will not be the last. It is not a thing I take personally anymore. I am an old man with a full garage and a dead wife and a lot of habits that do not make sense to younger people. That is just what I am. But here is what I want you to know about me, and about the garage, and about why I am the way I am. I am the way I am because everything in that garage, every single thing, was put there by a man who was building a life for 2 children to grow up in, and for a wife to grow old with. That is what the garage is. It is not a hobby. It is not clutter. It is a life. And when somebody looks at it and only sees the mess of it, That hurts me. Not because the mess is not there, but because the mess is the proof of the life. And I do not want the proof of the life thrown away. She had tears in her eyes by the end. So did Daniel. So. I will tell you, did I? I said, but I also want you to know something else. I have been thinking, too, in the last 3 weeks. I have been thinking that maybe I have held on to things too tight. Maybe I have. Maybe the garage does not need to be everything it has been. Maybe some of those duplicates can go. Maybe some of that lumber can find a better home. I will think about it. I will work on it. I will not promise a gym. I will not promise a rubber floor. But I will promise to think about it. With you. Instead of against you. That is what I can promise. She nodded. She wiped her eyes. She said, "That's more than I deserve." I said, "Megan, it is exactly what you deserve." Daniel cleared his throat. He said, "Pop, I owe you one, too." I said, "Son, I know." He said, "You heard me on the back porch." I said, "I did." He said, "Pop, I am so sorry." I said, "Son, I forgive you. I forgave you about 4 hours after I heard it. Because you are my son, and there is no other thing to do with a son. But I am glad you said it. A man should say a thing like that out loud, to the person he said it about, not just feel it in his chest." He nodded. We sat there a minute, the 3 of us, in a quiet that was a different kind of quiet from any quiet that had been in that room in 4 years. Caleb came over with the stuffed bear that Helen had patched at the elbow. He climbed up onto my knee. He said, "Grandpa, the bear is sad." I said, "Why is the bear sad, buddy?" He said, "Because his arm has a Band-Aid." I said, "Buddy, that is not a Band-Aid. That is what your grandma put on him a long time ago, because she said a bear should look like he had been through something." He thought about that. He said, "Like you, Grandpa." I said, "Yeah, buddy, like me." He hugged the bear. He stayed on my knee. We ate at 1. The pot roast was good. The corn pudding was very good. Megan had used too much butter, the way Daniel's aunt always had, and it was perfect. Caleb ate 2 helpings of the corn. Daniel ate 3 rolls. Megan ate seconds of the pot roast and made a face at it that was the face of a person admitting, without saying so, that they had been wrong about something they had been wrong about for a long time. After we ate, I said, "Son, I want to show you something. Out in the garage. Bring Caleb." I led them across the yard. I unlocked the side door of the garage with the brass knob. I turned on the yellow bulb. The 3 of them came in behind me. Megan came in too, this time, all the way in, not just to the doorway. She stood a little behind Daniel, with one hand on his back, and she looked around, slowly. The way a person looks around when they are trying to see a thing they have not let themselves see before. I walked over to the bench. The bicycle was under the clean drop cloth. I had laid it there with the front wheel pointing toward the door, so that when I lifted the cloth, the first thing Caleb would see would be the curve of the handlebar. I crouched down to Caleb's level. My knee did not love it, It cooperated. I said, "Caleb, buddy, I have something for you. Your grandma made it. She started it a long time ago, before you were born. I finished it." He looked at me with the wide, serious face that 4-year-olds get when an adult speaks to them like they are about to be trusted with something. I said, "Buddy, your grandma knew you were coming, even before your mommy and daddy did. She knew your name. She wrote it on this thing, with her own hands, almost 2 years before you were born. Do you understand what I am saying?" He shook his head. Of course he did not understand. He was 4. But he was listening. That was all I needed. I said, "She would have loved you so much, buddy, so much. And I think the thing she would have most wanted to do in this whole world was to give this to you, herself, today. But she could not, because she had to go a little before you got here. So she made me promise to give it to you for her. And I am giving it to you now." I stood up. I lifted the drop cloth off the bicycle. I do not know what I had thought a 4-year-old would do at that moment. I had not really thought it through. What he did was, he made a small noise that was not a word, and he walked over to the bicycle, and he put both of his small hands on the seat, and he looked up at me, and he said, "Grandpa, it has my name on it." I said, "Yes, buddy, it does." He said, "How did Grandma know?" I said, "I do not know how, buddy. Grandmas know things." He sat down on the floor next to it. He just sat. He ran his fingers along the carved letters of his name on the top tube. He did not get on the bicycle. He did not try to ride it. He just sat next to it, with his hand on the wood, the way I had seen Helen sit next to it on Wednesday evenings in 2019. I looked up. Daniel was crying. Megan was crying. Megan had both her hands over her mouth. Daniel said, "Pop." He could not get any more words than that out. I said, "It is all right, son." He came over to the bicycle. He crouched down beside Caleb. He ran his own fingers along the carving of his son's name. He said, very quietly, "Mom." He said it once, just once. The way a man says the name of somebody he has missed every day for a long time. We stayed in the garage a long while. Megan walked along the back wall and looked at the blueprints I had pinned up there. She looked at the photograph of me and Frank. She read the labels Helen had put on things in 1998, with the loops on the L's. She did not say much. She did not need to. There is a kind of seeing that is the only apology a person can give for a long stretch of not seeing, and Megan was doing that kind of seeing. After a while, I told Caleb to come over to the bench. I lifted him up onto the wooden stool Helen used to sit on, the one with the cushion her sister had sewn for her in 2010. I put a small wrench in his hand. It was a 1/4-inch open-end wrench, the smallest one I had. I showed him a bolt on the underside of the workbench. I said, "Buddy, you want to learn how to tighten a bolt?" He said, "Yes." I said, "All right, put the wrench on the bolt, like that. Good. Now turn it to the right, like a clock. Slowly. There you go. Not too tight. Just snug. There. You did it." He looked up at me with the kind of face a small boy makes when he has just learned a thing he is proud of. I said, "Good job, buddy." He said, "Grandpa, can I come back and do more?" I said, "Buddy, you can come back and do more anytime you want." He nodded, very seriously. He went back over to the bicycle and sat down next to it again. Megan was standing in the middle of the garage. She had been quiet for a long time. She turned to me, she said, "Bob, I want you to teach me about all of this. Not all at once. Over time. I want to know what these things are. I want to know what you built. I want to know who Frank was. I want to know what the part was that you made last week. I want my son to grow up knowing that his grandfather is an engineer. A real one. The kind they do not make anymore." I said, "Megan, I would like that very much." She nodded. She looked at me a second. She said, "Robert." I said, "Yes." She said, "That is your name, Robert. I am going to start using it. Bob never fit you." I smiled. I said, "Thank you." We stayed out in the garage until almost dark. I made coffee in the small percolator I keep on the shelf above the bench, the one Helen had set up for me in 1996 when she got tired of carrying cups out from the kitchen. The four of us sat in the garage and we drank coffee, except Caleb, who had apple juice in the same plastic cup with the cartoon dog on it that he had used 3 weeks before. We did not talk about the gym. We did not talk about the company. We did not talk about the past 3 weeks. We did not need to. The garage said everything that needed to be said, and we all knew how to listen to it now. Before they left the next morning, I helped Daniel load the bicycle carefully into the back of his car, wrapped in a soft blanket Helen had crocheted in 2014. Caleb sat in his car seat with both hands flat against the window, watching me, the way a small boy watches his grandfather when he is figuring out, for the first time, that his grandfather is a person and not just a feature of the world. I stood in the driveway. I waved as they pulled out. I waved until the car turned the corner and was gone. I went back inside the house. I poured a cup of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. I looked at the empty chair across from me, the way I always do. But this morning, when I looked at it, I did not feel the cold thing in my chest that had been there for 4 years. I felt something else. I felt Helen, sitting there, not in a ghost way, not in a strange way, just in the way a person sits with you when you have been carrying something for them, faithfully, for a long time, and you have finally been able to set it down where it belongs. I said, out loud, in the empty kitchen, "Helen, he has it now." The house did not answer. The house never does. But the freight train was running, somewhere off to the south, and the sun was coming up over the back fence, and the recipe card was still on the fridge with her handwriting on it. And that was enough. That has always been enough. There is one more thing I want to say, and then I will let you go. I had a daughter-in-law once who looked at my life and saw clutter. I have a daughter-in-law now who is going to come down on a weekend in February with a notebook in her hand to ask me what every shelf in the garage is. I had a son once who said his father was stuck in the past. I have a son now who calls me twice a week and asks me what I am working on, and who listens to my answer, and who, last Sunday, drove down with Caleb and spent 4 hours in the garage learning how to use a hand plane, the way I had learned from my own father in 1964. The garage will not be a gym. The bicycle will be ridden, this spring, in a park in San Jose, by a small boy with the name his grandmother gave him before he was born. The blueprints will be scanned, the way Megan suggested, because she was right about that one, and the originals will stay where they are, with the rust on the thumbtacks. The army green cabinet sits open in the back corner of the garage now. The doors are not closed. There is nothing left to lock up. Whatever I had been waiting to be ready for, I am ready for. I am 68 years old. I have lived in this house for 45 years. I have buried a wife I loved more than I knew how to say. I have raised a son who is, by any honest measure, a better man than I was at his age. I have a grandson who has my last name and his grandmother's eyes. I have hands that still work, in their way, and a garage that still has work in it for them. I have a freight train that runs past every night at 2:30, and a diner that knows my breakfast order without asking, and a photograph of a friend I lost too young, who is still standing on my left side when I need him, the way he always did. I am not stuck in the past. I am rooted in it. There is a difference. The past is the ground I stand on. It is the thing that lets me stand at all. If you have made it this far with me, I want to thank you. I do not know who you are, or where you are listening from, or what is keeping you up tonight. But I am glad you stayed. I hope this story has been worth your time. If it has, I hope you will leave a like and share it with someone in your life who might need it. Somebody who has a father, or who is a father, or who has lost one, or who has been thinking about a garage of their own. There is a button to subscribe. If you want to keep listening to stories like this one, there will be more of them. There are always more. And if you pray, the way Helen prayed, the way I have started praying again these last few weeks at the kitchen table in the mornings, then say one tonight for the old men in the garages, the ones whose hands still remember the work, the ones who are waiting to be remembered. God knows their names. God always has. Thank you for listening.